give it a try. Honestly, it's not going to hurt you. It's only good things can come from it. Even if you decide that it's not for you, that will help you find that clarity. You'll always pick up lessons to learn and different skill sets from joining this industry and trying. This industry, one of the great things about it is that nobody, regardless of whether they're in senior leadership or middle management like me, or frontline supervisor or salesperson, or you name it, or mechanic, nobody can be successful in this industry on their own. Honestly, it's we're working with equipment from the 1950s all the way through present day, as far as age range goes, and then as far as breadth of equipment you're working with hundreds of different kinds of OEMs. And so it's the ultimate, like I said, proven ground for leadership, but it's also the ultimate environment for people that are team oriented. This is a team sport, the elevator industry, all the way.
Hello, and welcome to the Elevator Careers Podcast, sponsored by the Allred Group. I am your host, Matt Allred. In this podcast, we talk to the people whose lives and careers are dedicated to the vertical transportation industry to inform and share lessons learned, building upon the foundation of those who have gone before to inspire the next generation of elevator careers. Today, our guest is Chris Miller, General Manager with Kone in Salt Lake City, Utah. Chris joined the elevator industry after several years in the U.S. Air Force, where he took to heart the core values, integrity first, service before self, and excellence in all we do. Chris loves what he does and has come to know that the elevator business is truly a team sport. Nobody can succeed alone. Chris is a student of leadership and strives to become a better leader every day. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah, I'm excited. It's always good to talk to you, and I appreciate your willingness to do this interview and share with me some of the things you've learned throughout your career. And first question I just want to ask is, did you ever, as a kid, think you would spend your life working in the elevator industry?
No, that's a good question. And I never even thought of the elevator industry, never even thought it was an industry until in 2007, a headhunter had found my resume online and asked me if it was something I was interested in pursuing. And that's when I was like, oh, there's a whole industry around elevators. So yeah, I had no idea about it.
Right. What was your early vision as a a kid or growing up? What did you want to be?
I actually wanted to be a race car driver for a long time, and then that pivoted to being a professional football player, and then but just as far as more pedestrian type goals with career, it's funny because when I would ask my parents when I was growing up what my dad did for a living, they always just said, well, he's a businessman. And so I just always assumed I would become a businessman, whatever that is. Right. So those were my visions, going into business, whatever that is.
Yeah. Well, you ended up spending some time in the military. What was it that led you that direction?
Yeah, when I was growing up, I had I did have a sense that I really did want to, quote unquote, serve the country in some way, shape, or form. And I, as a young person, really felt that the way you serve the country is by being in the military. Now, quick caveat, I've since learned as a result of actually my military experience that you can serve the country in many, many other ways. The military is just one avenue by which you can serve. But nonetheless, I did have a desire to serve in the military, and I had the privilege of also getting recruited to play football at the Air Force Academy. So it became kind of a two birds, one stone kind of thing. It was like, oh, I can be in the Air Force and I can play football in college. So to me, it was kind of a no brainer that was the path I was going to pursue.
No, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, what were some of the most valuable lessons you learned while you were in the military?
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind is really the core values of the Air Force, and that is integrity first, service before self, excellence in all we do. And that's something that right from day one in basic training that starts getting drilled into your head,
Sure.
until it becomes less of a cognitive thing and more of a heart thing in terms of those core values. Um, Without a doubt, those are still core values that I adhere to today. And again, just to repeat it for the sake of conversation, integrity first. That's no matter what. You always have to have integrity, and the way I define integrity is integration between public and private life. That's no duplicity.
Sure.
It's it's what you see is what you get. Your words and your actions are integrated. Service before self, as we'll talk about, I'm sure today. I'm a big proponent of being a servant leader. I think that
Right.
is the model of leadership. The best model of leadership is a servant leader. So service before self, really for me started as a result of my experience in the military. And excellence in all we do is really, put another way, is be the best version of yourself.
Right.
Um, um, so I think that those are beautiful core values to live by, and that came from the military.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I'm sure we could spend a lot of time just kind of digging into that. I do want to shift a little bit because you had a transition out of military into civilian life. I'm just curious what that was like. I've heard some different stories and from others, but what was your experience
Yeah,
like?
yeah. It was. I didn't realize it at the time, but it probably took me a few years to what I would call demilitarize. When I went into the civilian world. Um, Looking back on it, because I got out of the military in '06, so I was active duty from '98 to '06, and I think I was probably fairly rigid when I first got into the civilian world. Things were more black and white, if you will, in terms of how you do things. It being in the working world as a civilian, I had to adjust to the fact that um, people don't just do things because you say,
They don't
let's do
salute
them, or
and all
this is
that,
what we
right?
should
It's
do.
like,
Exactly. And so it's much more, dare I say, winning friends and influencing people
sure.
by really getting them to buy into who you are, and why they should trust you and believe you, as opposed to having the military structure of, well, he or she's the boss, and we have to do it because they say so. So more subtle, had to rely on much more than just my authority with the
Right.
position that I was in. And also have to be more flexible, quite honestly. Now, that probably sounds like a little bit of a oxymoron, because lots of times in the military, flexibility is key. In fact, when I was in the Air Force, they used to say flexibility is the key to air power. And there's a lot of truth to those things. However, in the civilian world, you just there's a lot more. Um, uh, well, I should say there's a lot less structure, and therefore there's a much greater importance on being able to influence uh, people, not just because of the position that you hold.
Right, right. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I guess what's coming to mind is, just that influence seems to be more individual. You can't just say to 100 people, "Okay, march after me," and expect all 100. So you have to essentially work or exert yourself to kind of one by one get to know the people and say, "Okay, here's where we're going," right? Or
Yeah,
something
yeah,
like
very
that.
well said. It's so interesting is that I do consider myself a student of leadership, and I think you never fully reach the top of the mountain as a leader if you're a true student of
Sure.
any discipline, for that matter. There's always continual improvement. It's a labor of love, if you will. It's an art.
Yeah.
Um, um, yes, you could say there's a science aspect of leading, right? But the implementation of leadership is art, right? Making it your own, having it fit and be um, authentically yours, the principles of leadership, having them fit within your personality and how you choose to apply them. And so my own leadership style, I would say, in some ways has adapted and morphed a lot from when I was in the military to where I'm at now in the civilian world in the elevator industry. but the core principles have remained the same. Like what we started out with those three core values, and then, but the chain of command, the way information flows, the need to set expectations, hold people accountable, uh, follow through, communicate, both with your internal customers and external. And so that's the dichotomy, if you will, that the implementation must be flexible and adapt to the
Right.
situations you're in, but the core principles kind of remain the same. And so, just to be more specific to your comments, Matt, it's kind of like when you lead people, you have to hold everyone accountable. You have to hold a consistent standard, if you will, and that, hey, if this is the behavior, this will be the result, be it a
Right.
positive consequence or a negative consequence, because one thing that kills morale quicker than anything else in an organization is if people feel that certain folks are getting unfair
Sure.
favoritism,
Yeah.
or other folks aren't being held accountable. But that doesn't mean you treat everybody the same, right? And so, how I motivate maybe one of my superintendents versus that has one type of personality versus how I need to speak to or address or motivate, let's say, another salesperson with a whole totally different kind of personality. I need to adjust my style to effectively communicate
Right.
each person based on how they're motivated, while also maintaining the consistency of equal accountability across the board.
Yeah.
And that's the art aspect of it,
Yeah.
if
No,
you
I
will.
love that. I love that. It definitely it makes it more personal, right? To address each person in a way that you can connect with them, build the trust, and then, hopefully they have a desire to, you know, come along.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, well said. It's every single person, as we know, is different. We're not all
Sure.
the same, and therefore, a one size fits all approach, if you're a leader, is never going to be the most effective approach. You have to know your audience, right?
Yeah.
That's like communication 101 right there, is
Yeah. Yeah.
who's your audience. Leadership is so much about communication, so knowing your audience, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You shared with me a story about working in a labor union and, as I recall, it's aerospace out after the military. What was, share that with me and what you learned from
Yeah.
kind of that experience.
Yeah, that was kind of a transition job for me, because I it was my first civilian job post military. So this was in the 2006 timeframe, and I was running baggage handlers at a major airport, and that happened to be organized labor, the workforce that I was running. And keep in mind, this is back when I was in just beginning the process of being, air quotes here, demilitarized. I was very much in the military mindset still, even though I
Sure.
was a civilian then. And I remember going to a particular gate at this airport where the one of the baggage handling crews was that I was running for that shift. And I introduced myself as their supervisor for the evening, and they proceeded to say, why the F do we care? And I thought to myself, well, I am not in the military anymore, am I? There was no saluting, no calling me sir. And so that was, quite honestly, there were a few good lessons that came out of that 1 year stint, that transition stint, before I eventually found my way into the elevator industry. And that is, um, one, I'm not anti-union, but there has to be a balance of power, if you will,
Sure.
between the company side and the union side.
Right.
There has to be balance, and it can't be, if it's a seesaw, if it's tipped too much one way or the other, then that doesn't make for fair balance and negotiating in good faith, if you will.
Right.
And it doesn't build trust, right? But the other problem that I discovered through that experience was that there has to be a balance between, or rather, there has to be equal um, authority that's commensurate with the responsibility level. So I was a superintendent in that role,
Right.
and the superintendents, my peer superintendents who were working with me at that location for that company, we had all of the responsibility, but we didn't have the authority that matched that responsibility. And so you felt kind of like a sitting duck or a sacrificial
Was it
lamb.
was it the company just not supporting you, or what did that look like in as you saw it?
That was from a lack of support from our leadership up the chain from us,
Hmm. Hmm.
and because of leaders above the immediate superintendents, higher up, operations manager level folks, because of their lack of courage. Because when you're in leadership, you're going to have incongruity. You're going to have courageous conversations. You're going to have to
Right.
hold folks accountable, and that doesn't mean you have to have ugly conflict, but it means that as a part of human nature, there will be conflict. And in my opinion, because those folks weren't willing to have any conflict whatsoever, it had created this imbalance where the union had all the power. The superintendents didn't have anything. We knew that if anything we did, anytime we would try to hold someone accountable who was a union member, it would eventually be overturned through the multiple levels of the grievance process.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
so that's why I say there has to be authority commensurate with responsibility level. And that begins with your higher ups supporting you as a
Yeah.
frontline person. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I like the way you say that. And to me, what I'm seeing in my mind is just, a leader has to be able, like you say, to live with that incongruity and kind of bridge that gap, to kind of stand in that space between, hey, this is incongruous, and yet being able to kind of deal justly with all sides. And
Mm.
that's not an easy thing. And it's not something that, like you say, you can just hide from. If you're in that role, the forces on either side are gonna, create the imbalance and take
Yeah.
advantage of the other, perhaps.
Yeah, it's true. I have a tremendous amount of respect for frontline supervisors in any organization, quite honestly, because it's where what I say, that's where the superintendent lives in the brackish water. And I don't know much about sailing or boats or being on the water, but I know this, and that is some of the most turbulent water is where fresh water and salt water
Hmm.
mix.
Okay.
And that's referred to as brackish water. And so that's where the superintendent lives. That's their
Right.
life, is in the brackish water. They are right where uh, the union and where the company meet, and
Sure.
that can be a good mixing, a good relationship if you have a superintendent that knows how to bridge that gap and to build trust on both sides. Um, Unfortunately, you don't find many good superintendents because it's a very difficult job. It requires all of yourself, and it requires every bit of leadership skills and commitment to work ethic that one has. Um, but I know it can be done. I've seen it done, and when it does happen, and when that gap is bridged, and there's trust between company and union, it's truly a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Tell
It
tell me about, what are the critical components to really being able to bridge that gap? And as I say that, I'm one of the things that's coming to mind is somebody I talked with recently who, similar to you, came out of the military, got put right into a superintendent job, and they were telling me how, to be able, what they did, ask a lot of questions, but even then the mechanics were like, what do you, why are you asking all these questions? But also just being humble enough to realize that I'm not here to teach you anything. I'm here to
mm,
to help bring
yeah,
some solutions. I'm just curious what you would say to
yeah,
them.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's so interesting. Bear with me. I'll meander a tiny bit. And that is, when we talk about diversity, right? One of the forms of diversity, I think, as far as let's talk in the elevator industry,
Hmm.
would be having superintendents. If you have superintendents in a particular office, a blend between outside the industry superintendents and superintendents that have come up from the field.
Sure.
That's a nice balance, because outside the industry hires like myself have one particular approach and can see things perhaps in a different way, dare I say, fresh way.
Hmm.
Um, but others that have come up as mechanics have a level of expertise, technical expertise, that guys like me that came in from the outside aren't going to have. And when
Sure.
you put those two different kind of perspectives together, again, a lot of beautiful magic things can happen. But one of the things that I learned is that as a superintendent or an operations manager, you don't have to be the technical expert. It's not my job to know exactly how to troubleshoot an elevator if it's showing certain fault codes, or or if we've had multiple call outs on a particular elevator in spite of having done X, Y, and Z. It's not me as a superintendent that, well, let me tell you what we need to do, Mr. Foreman Mechanic,
Right.
and this will fix it. Rather, a superintendent's a generalist, and they need to provide the support and the tools and the training or whatever the case may be for the people that are the subject matter experts, which in this example would be the mechanics in the field.
Sure.
So by making how do you get buy-in then from a union person, if you're their boss as a superintendent and you've never been a mechanic? In my experience, what I learned is that you have to prove to them that their life is better with you around than not around, meaning your presence helps them. It helps their job to be easier. It gets them the tools or the support, or you engage on issues with customers that provides them a level of support and gives them a clear path to do what they do best, which is fix elevators.
Yeah.
So when the field, in this case, the union folks, get that buy-in that, wow, life is better with this particular superintendent around, then you start getting that trust. And then you start really, again, beautiful things start happening.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm sure that obviously there's a vast array of that. I'm just curious, how long does that take? And what are maybe some specific examples of,
Mm.
here's when trust was won?
Yeah, that is an excellent question. And it varies, right? I'm going to sound like a politician when I say this, but it depends, Matt.
Yeah.
But I'll answer you. I'll answer you direct here. The um, It does depend on the people that you have. It depends on the culture that's kind of already in place, because culture plays a piece of this too. And
Oh,
just as
sure.
a quick aside, there's a saying which I'm sure you've heard. Many people probably listening to this podcast have heard it, and that is culture eats strategy for breakfast. And that is, no matter what kind of fancy strategy someone may come up with, if your team has a winning culture, they're going to figure out a way to get it done. Pick your favorite NFL team, whether, Steelers in the 70s, Niners in the 80s, or whatnot. They
Wow.
always, with their culture, they always found a way to win. Um, so, what I have found, in my experience as a superintendent, it's usually a year, but that's
Okay.
not a hard and
Yeah.
fast rule.
Sure.
You have to grind it out. You have to prove over the course of time that you are who you say you are, and that who you say you are is not just a flash in the pan. It's real and proven over the course of time.
Which in my experience is difficult in itself because looking back on some of my experiences coming out of college, I was an HR guy for a while, and I was like, I was kind of a jerk.
mm,
I didn't have a good, I don't think a good self concept, of who I was, and maybe I thought I had a little more power than than they were willing to give me. But there are some things that I regret. So maybe for me, it would have been a few extra years to kind of say, okay, dude, you know,
mm.
maybe now we can trust you. But
Yeah, but
I'm just curious to, yeah,
there's one reason with superintendents in particular it takes a while to build trust is because they turn over so quickly.
sure,
And so a lot of times the field guys are like, well, who's this latest guy or girl? And
right,
we'll see how long they last.
right,
And so again, it's not for the faint of heart. But I'll give you a real example, and I don't mean this to toot my horn, but it's something I'm grateful for. It was a team effort, and but there was a job in a major city, and I had come in as the service manager in this downtown office. We had 18 folks that I was running in the field, and the previous folks had been a revolving door, and it was an extremely strong, crusty union environment, very anti-company, and the definition of love is to will the good of the other. And I think when you look at servant leadership, people need to love their people, even if their people injure them for that. Now, I don't mean love them like, hey, I'm going to be your best buddy, because leadership is not about being everybody's best buddy,
Right.
but leadership takes courage. And just like a parent, in my opinion, a parent shouldn't necessarily be their child's best friend. They need to
Right.
be their mom or their dad, right? Well, in the
Right.
same case, a leader needs to be a leader first
Mm.
versus everybody's buddy. But in this particular case, the example I'm referencing, it took every bit of a year before these very hardened IUEC gentlemen finally started warming up to me. And when they did warm up to me, the level of loyalty that I had from them is unparalleled to any level of loyalty I've ever had by any other
Wow.
group in the entirety of my career. And so it goes back to the old adage: you're going to get out of it what you put into it. And
Right.
anything in this life worth achieving is going to require blood, sweat, and tears. That's just how it goes.
That's yeah, I love that. I appreciate that. And I think that's certainly something to, rising generation, my own kids, right? Helping them realize that it's not just about kicking back and putting your feet on the desk, right? If you really want to engage and succeed, there's, like you say, blood, sweat, tears. There's real effort that goes really deep into who are you and how are you going to engage with these people. And I think that, referencing my example before, I think that's where I was kind of struggling 20 something years ago was I was pretty insecure myself, and so I didn't know how to navigate those waters. And
Mm.
it's taken me a while to learn that. So thanks for bringing that up.
Oh, you bet. And, in your defense, that all of us go through that, truly, and, the, I once read that the definition of humility is just thinking less of yourself. Now, that doesn't mean thinking less of yourself in terms of esteem, like I'm just a piece of dirt. No, it means thinking less often of yourself, being more
Right. Yeah.
other focused. That's a good example of humility. And I think it takes folks, if we humans are like fine wine, we get ideally we get better with age, right?
Right.
And
Hopefully.
humility is something that oftentimes has to be learned, right? When we're
Sure.
younger, lots of times when we're younger, as we see in our kids, it's kind of me, right?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. By default, I think we just come programmed that way. So,
Right.
so I'm curious what, once you joined the elevator industry, how long before things started to click that, hey, this is somewhere where I could actually stay. I can plant some roots here.
Yeah, another great question. Well, I'll be very honest with you. For a long time, I was trying to run away from the responsibility of being a superintendent. I was giving it my all,
Sure.
and I attribute the military background for that. Is that, hey, this is the mission before me, and even if I'm not enjoying it, I need to give it everything I got, right?
Sure.
But the elevator industry and a superintendent in particular in the elevator industry is very demanding. Dare I say
Yeah.
it's kind of like a 24/7
Always on. Yeah.
commitment. Yeah. And I was very much when I was younger seeking that the Margaritaville that Jimmy Buffett sings about, and how am I going to make that happen, and still have enough money, and just life is about relaxing and just having a good time. And
Sure.
um, as I've matured, because we were just talking about that in the previous question and answer, and that is just from my own philosophy. The older I get, the more I realize that life is not about me. It's about serving others.
Yeah.
Love, right? Like as I defined it a few minutes ago, to will the good of the other, servant
Sure.
leadership, right? And so I had a stint back in 2015 as a year as a consultant. And I had thought to myself, a consultant in the elevator industry, and I had thought to myself, oh, this is great. I'm not going to have anybody that reports to me. I'm going to be a lone wolf, independent individual contributor. I'm going to
Right.
have better work-life balance. I'll be able to do kind of whatever I want. Well, it was very eye-opening for me, but I really did not like that job. I thought I would, but I thought
Sure.
it was everything I wanted. And we also know that sometimes one of the funny things in life is when people get exactly what they want, sometimes they find out it's not actually what they wanted. And that's kind of
Right.
what happened to me. Now, the consultant thing for me wasn't my gig. And I
Sometimes you miss,
realized,
yeah, the
yeah,
most
I
of.
realized that I wanted the leadership piece. I missed having a mission and purpose. I missed having the camaraderie of having other peers and direct reports and bosses in the fight with me, right? And so it was at that time that I felt, in a sense, like the prodigal son, and I decided to return.
Okay.
I was like, okay, this leadership thing, it's what I do, and it's the stressful side of this business. But this time, instead of running from it and fighting it all the time, I'm going to go back into it. I'm going back into the fight, and I recognize now that this is what I do, and that my life is not about me. I mean, at this point in time,
Sure.
when I had made that decision, I had 2 daughters and another one on the way, and so all of that played into me now embracing the responsibility that comes with being a leader. And quite
What's the
honestly, it's made all the difference. It's
Yeah, I was
made
going
all
to
the
ask you
difference for me.
Yeah. So just leaning into it, like you say, it's a weight, right? There's a weight of responsibility on your shoulders, and what I hear you saying is I was wanting to kind of run away from that, and now I'm just leaning in, squaring my shoulders and putting that weight there, and that's where you're finding your joy.
That's true. Yeah, it's funny how that works, isn't it? Yeah, it's in self-sacrifice that yes, they can be. You can have very tough times. You might not be quote unquote happy in a particular moment because of the stress and the things that are going on, but you can have joy. Joy is deeper than happiness, and you can have true joy if you know you're on purpose and you're serving others, and that the team that you're a part of is on the right path, and the sacrifices that are being made are for a greater good.
Yeah.
Um, I do firmly believe that with leadership, what separates mere leaders that are posing as leaders versus authentic leaders, genuinely authentic leaders, is what I would call suffering and responsibility. That sounds doom and gloom, but I really think that that's what it comes down to. Is the true bona fide leaders out there are willing to suffer, and they're willing to say, put the responsibility on my shoulders. They don't run from it. They run
Yeah.
to it.
Yeah.
And it's not
So
meant for everybody.
like kind of what I'm hearing is almost kind of like willing to sacrifice your whether it's time, your convenience for your people, for the greater good, for because bearing that burden of leadership is, there is a sacrifice to that. But like you say, if that's where your gifts are and that's where you find your joy, then that's awesome. You
Yeah. I think it's important to recognize where one's talents and gifts lie, right? Not
Mhm.
everybody's a leader. Not everyone's meant to be a leader, right?
Sure.
And that's not to say that leaders are better than other people. No, we need this world needs people of every kind of background and talent level and skill level and all different kinds of gifts, right? But for those who do have the quote unquote gift of leadership, um, and once they recognize that, then that's something to be embraced. And
Yeah.
dare I say that's part of what your calling is if you have those particular gifts, there's a reason for that.
That's cool. You had mentioned earlier, being a student of leadership, and I'm just curious, what are some of the most powerful tools, resources? I'm assuming, and you can clarify this, but that the student of leadership maybe came post 2015 versus prior to that when you weren't quite as settled in that role.
No doubt. Yeah. And again, very astute observation and comment on your part. Right. When in embracing it, it's almost similar to if you had somebody who has musical talent, but they're not interested in it. And I don't want to practice the piano 3 hours a day after school,
Sure.
But then something clicks maybe when they're older and they recognize that, wow, this really is a gift that not many people have, and I need to cultivate it. I need to hone it. And then they start doing that. And to validate what you just said, that's very much how it was for me. I mean, I actually study leadership now. So to answer your question, there's 3 things in particular that have kind of formed the hallmark of my civilian leadership style that have helped out a lot. Believe it or not, one of them is the old Gary Chapman book, Five Love Languages. I highly recommend that because it's not just about romantic relationships. It's about relationships as a whole. Does somebody are words of affirmation someone's love language? I can tell you, for me, if somebody says thank you to me, I'm willing to run through a burning brick wall for them. That's a love language for me.
Wow.
Other people may be like my mother. Her love language is gift giving. That is how she shows her love, is by giving people gifts. Even if it's going to make her go bankrupt, she's getting gifts for you to show you she loves you. So Five Love Languages, one book I highly recommend. Another one is Patrick Lencioni's Five Dysfunctions of a Team, and it basically talks about how trust is the most important aspect of any team that's going to be world class. You have to have trust as its foundation. And he's not talking about predictive trust. He's talking about, predictive trust, meaning I know Matt Allred's going to ask another question of me. I can predict that's going to happen.
Right.
But the trust that that Patrick Lencioni's talking about is trust that I can be real on this team. I can actually have a different opinion than my boss, and I don't have to worry about sharing that different opinion with my boss. I don't have to worry that he's going to fire me as a result of that. So that's a great book and great principle. I highly recommend to everyone. And then the third thing is the DISC model, DISC, and that talks about people's four different personality types. Some people under the I portion of the DISC model are congruent. They're very affable. They get along with everybody. They want people. They want. It's very important to them that people like them. Other people, like with D, are very direct, and it's kind of like, hey, you're talking too much. Get to the point. I want it. What's your point here? And so in leadership, what we were talking about earlier is know your audience, right? All of that helps me to know my audience. Am I talking to a D? Well, then I'm not going to ask them how their day was. I'm just going to go straight to what we got to talk about. Let's get to business. Or am I talking to somebody that's an S on that model? That means they love data. So I'm not going to give them my opinion. I'm going to show them data, because data to them is all that matters.
Right.
These are all good things to keep in mind with, leadership, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah. So what, and obviously we've talked a lot about leadership. I'm curious, what would you, if you boiled it down, what's the essence? What's at the core of good leadership?
Caring about others. What I said before about love, it's servant leadership. It's about genuinely caring about those you've been charged with leading, to whom much has been given, much is expected, right? And leadership is, it's a humbling honor, and it's a lot of responsibility, and much is expected of it.
Yeah.
And so you have to care, and you have to genuinely, and I use this word, love your people, will the good of the other, even if they injure you for it. You need to be strong enough as a leader and courageous enough as a leader to deal with that, because it's not for the faint of heart.
Right. Well, and people can tell if you care or don't care, right? And that's what you're going to get back is, it's even though it's maybe easy to think that you can hide it, you can't, right? They're going to know.
I agree, and I think that ties in, Matt, to what we were saying before, about, when I was saying it takes roughly a year to earn people's trust. That's because, over the course of a year, you can really see the consistency of somebody's motives in their character. Really, it's very easy for people to be turning on the charm and a certain way, maybe for a short period of time, right? And so that it's over the course of time that people begin to see that, what, I might not like this leader in terms of he might not be the person I want to hang out with all the time, but I respect him and I recognize that he or she is a good leader. Like is not necessarily synonymous with whether someone's a good leader or not. I've liked plenty of people that haven't been great leaders. There's been other people that, quite honestly, have been maybe I haven't liked as much, but boy, did I have a tremendous amount of respect for them as leaders, and boy, were they effective as leaders. And that doesn't mean they didn't care for me. They cared for me greatly, but leadership, like I said, shouldn't necessarily be a popularity contest, because whether someone likes you or not, feelings are so fleeting, right?
Yeah.
Feelings come and go just like the clouds pass over the sky. But so over the course of time, you can build that trust, and then people can begin to see, uh, if you're truly who you say you are as a
Yeah.
leader and have their best interest in mind.
Right. Yeah. If they learn to trust you, then they can put their whole heart into it, knowing that, you're not just going to be capricious or, because until they feel that safety is what I would interpret it, then they don't feel like they can give what they've got to give.
That's true. And the boss, whether people are conscious of it or not, the boss usually sets the tempo.
Oh,
If the
sure.
boss is busting his or her butt, um, that doesn't mean everybody's going to bust their butt, but more than not, they will. If the boss is playing hooky all the time, then most likely their folks are going to. Well, if the boss doesn't care, then why should I?
Yeah. Very true.
Um, yeah, yeah. So I will say this, for those, for other folks that you may be working with, Matt, that are junior military officers or, or senior NCOs, and they're considering this elevator industry. I will tell you, um, it's if they, in addressing them, if they consider themselves truly students of leadership, if they consider themselves leaders and that's their profession is leadership, then
Right.
this is a great industry for them, because, for myself, it's not about elevators. The elevator is a great industry, but when you're in a leadership role like I am, elevators just happens to be the currency in which we're dealing with, or that I'm
Right.
dealing with. But it's more about leading in organizations and social psychology and individual psychology and how people get along. And it, you know, it's elevators now for me, and it will be the rest of my career. But you pick the industry. These are all the
Sure.
same kind of challenges that leaders face. And I can tell you that like the Marcus Allen story I shared with you a couple of weeks ago. I was watching this NFL Life story on Marcus Allen, the great running back for the Raiders and
Right.
the Chiefs. And one of the things he said was one of the reasons he liked playing football was because he found it to be the ultimate proving ground for one's toughness, as in
Wow.
this case, as a man, right? Um, and I would dare say that leadership in this industry, and especially if you're coming up as a supervisor, same exact thing. This is the ultimate proving ground for leadership, and it's not
Yeah.
for the faint of heart. And it's going to require all of yourself, and to bridge the gap between companies and union, and it's a tough industry, but that magic can happen. And I've had the good fortune of being a part of organizations where that does happen. And as tough as this industry is, it you can actually have fun in it
Yeah.
when that starts clicking, and people start buying into the common purpose, common goals, common objectives.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. And as we get close to our time here, I just got one question. I think that's going to tie this together, and that is, what advice would you give to someone who is brand new? Maybe they're coming out of the military, maybe they're coming out of college. Someone who's brand new to this industry. What would you tell them?
um I would tell them, give it a try. Honestly, it's not going to hurt you. It's only good things can come from it. Even if you decide that it's not for you, that will help you find that clarity. You'll always pick up lessons to learn and different skill sets from joining this industry and trying. Um, this industry, one of the great things about it is that nobody, regardless of whether they're in senior leadership or middle management like me, or frontline supervisor or salesperson, or you name it, or mechanic, nobody can be successful in this industry on their own. Honestly, it's we're working with equipment from the 1950s all the way through present day, as far as age range goes, and then as far as breadth of equipment you're working with hundreds of different kinds of OEMs, and so it's the ultimate, like I said, proven ground for leadership, but it's also the ultimate environment for people that are team oriented. It's a total. This is a team sport, the elevator industry, all the way. And so that would be my advice is to give it a try and progress through motion. Even if you don't know what you want to be when you grow up, the way you get closer to finding what you want to be when you grow up is through progress. It's not by sitting in a room and just saying, I'm going to do nothing till I figure out what I want to do. No, it's by doing something that you're going to figure out what you ultimately want to do.
Chris, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure interviewing you, and I appreciate you being with me.
Well, I'm humbled and honored that you asked me. So thanks, Matt. I enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you. Good luck to you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Elevator Careers podcast, sponsored by the Allred Group, a leader in elevator industry recruiting. You can check us out online at elevatorcareers.net. Please subscribe, and until next time, stay safe.